Today we're going to be talking about makeup application, basically how you get the makeup out of the container and onto your face, and how the way you apply it can change your final result. So we're going to look at 3 common application methods, things that we've probably all done. Makeup brushes, makeup sponges, and something that most of us have, our fingers. You're going to learn what brushes, makeup sponges, and fingers actually physically do to the makeup, and why each method can make the same product perform completely differently on your skin. Hi everyone, my name is Lori Hill, and on this channel I teach you about makeup and how to solve common beauty concerns, so you can better understand your own features, how to work with them, and how to appreciate your own natural beauty. So this is the first episode of my new series called Makeup Encyclopedia. In this series, we're going back to the basics and breaking down makeup from A to Z, so you can better understand how makeup actually works and feel more confident and in control when you do your own makeup. I'm also going to learn along the way with you all, and everything I learn, I'm going to teach you here. We're doing this together. Each encyclopedia letter will have 1 to 3 videos within it. And in the description box, I'll be keeping a running list of each episode as well, along with any links for products that I mention here that I use myself. I'll also link them through YouTube shopping. Let's get started. I'm going to go through each category of makeup and explain how each application method affects the product so you can decide which method of application you want to use for each product. Let's start with foundation. We have foundation brushes. These will give you really good control and coverage, and they're really good for buffing and stippling. These work really well when you need to deposit a good amount of product. Now for concealer, we have a concealer brush. This is something I use along with directly depositing product from the container onto my skin. I then go in and blend with a concealer brush. Now this offers really precise and targeted coverage. You're going to want to use a brush for your concealer when it's important to have a very blended in look. Now for blush, bronzer, and contour, these types of brushes will be the type you use. They offer really controlled placement and diffusion. Now, I don't think there's another modality that we're going to talk about here that offer the diffusion that a blush or contour brush would offer. So what about powder, blush, bronzer, contour, and brow powder? I would say a brush is the main tool you want to use for any of those. For highlighter, using a brush for highlighter does offer precision, and it's good when you want to use a large amount of highlighter. It's also great for diffusing a small amount of highlighter, especially along your cheekbones. I can't think of a better way to apply eyeshadow than with a brush. This brush by BK Beauty is great for eyeshadow. Also, this smudging brush is great for angling out your shadow and really getting under a hooded eye. For packing, for blending, for lining, and for detailing, eyeshadow brushes are basically indispensable for that. How about for lip products? When you want a very precise look, you may want to use a lip brush. Another reason to use a lip brush is to fill in cracked lips or lips that have begun the aging process. It really helps to use a lip brush to get in those little crevices. Now, how about to line the lips? Well, it depends. If you want a very precise look to really emphasize that Cupid's bow, you may think about using a retractable or regular lip brush. Now, if you prefer a more smudged look, you're going to want to use your fingers. And again, we're going to talk about that just a bit later. Now, how about for powder? I think brushes give you a nice veiled, soft focused look. You can also go more concentrated with a powder brush, but I think overall for a more concentrated look, you're going to want to use a sponge, something like this, a powder puff and a sponge on the other side. Going now to sponges. Now for foundation, I will confess I use a sponge. What I love about sponges is that if you put a little too much foundation, sponges will take great care to pull that foundation out. And it's like magical the way sponges work. But on the flip side, they do sacrifice some coverage. They sometimes will pull out just a bit too much product. If you're someone like me who tends to put on a bit too little foundation, then you may find yourself pumping out more and more foundation. But also the good thing is it lets you layer on foundations without worry of putting too much on. How about concealer? Using a sponge for a concealer may be useful for blending edges. If you find you've, again, put on too much product, a sponge will help to pull back that product. I love these little sponges for concealer use. They get excess product from around the nose and in the eye corners. These are really great for use also with foundation to get in that inner corner of your eye and your nose. For a liquid or cream blush, a sponge would offer a very diffused look. It may take too much away of that product. So if you found that you've used too much contour or too much blush, consider using a sponge to remove some of that. So how about for a powder, bronzer, blush, contour, and brow powder? I can't see using a sponge for any of those. Using a sponge with a highlighter can make it integrate more and stand out less. So always think, do I want this product to stand out more? Don't pick up the sponge. If you want it to seamlessly integrate, pick up a sponge. Now, what about powder? You can absolutely use a sponge for powder application. And it can actually press powder more into the skin and more densely than a brush can. It can really pack in that powder. I like using this powder puff with the sponge on the other side for baking. If I'm ever baking, I will use this powder puff for that because it really packs in the powder. For eyeshadow, a sponge really has limited usefulness. And for lips, I don't see any reason to use a sponge. Now we get to the last category, and that's fingers. For foundation or a skin tint, using your fingers will offer a skin-like finish, quick spreading, and it will deposit pretty evenly. The challenge though is that your hands are going to be dirty and that will just make a mess. So I would probably not use the finger method in applying foundation. Now for concealer, what I do first is I dot on the concealer. I use a concealer brush and I use a concealer brush to pat it in. I then take my finger and press in the concealer so it fully integrates into my skin, and the warmth of my body helps it do so. Now for cream or a liquid blush or contour, you can use your fingers. You're gonna press in with your fingers and that's gonna help it to blend in more easily because again, the warmth of your fingers are helping to spread and to integrate that product into your face. Now, When doing so though, you do take the risk of rubbing off what you've already done. So I would recommend using a brush for blush and contour and bronzer application. So how about for powder, bronzer, blush, contour, or brow powder? I can't see using fingers for any of those products. Now for highlighter, you can use your fingers. You pick up a little bit of highlighter and then you spread it, for example, across your cheeks, patting it or spreading it very lightly with a very light tension will help it to just sit on top of all the makeup you've already done. So for eyeshadow, you can absolutely use your fingers. It's really effective, in fact, when you use your fingers for a metallic, a shimmer, or even cream shadows. It will give you a completely different color payoff, will be more intense than a brush. So I encourage you to experiment there. For lip products, you can definitely use your fingers. It's a smudged, more youthful look where the borders of the lips just aren't defined. And I remember a few years ago, Violet FR, which actually used to be a YouTube channel, I think they still are, they were demonstrating that application prior to them having a makeup line. And I think it's a very French chic application to use your fingers to apply lip balms, lipsticks, and lip oils even. And then should you use your fingers to apply powder? I'm gonna say no. I'm gonna say there's very limited to no use for using your fingers to apply powder. Remember that the applicator doesn't have one universal effect. Like saying a sponge gives less coverage is true for like a foundation, but it's not universally true. In fact, a sponge or a puff can press powder into the skin much more intensely, much heavier than like a fluffy brush. And likewise, fingers don't universally create a sheer result. Put a metallic eyeshadow on your finger and you'll get more pigment and impact than if you used a brush. So a quick recap: brushes, precision and control; sponges, pressing and diffusion; fingers, when you need warmth and direct contact and control with the product. The big takeaway here is how you apply your makeup can be just as important as the product itself. The right application method can completely change how a product looks and performs on your face. So that is our official guide to application, but we're going to go much more in depth into application as this series goes on. Since this is the very beginning of the Makeup Encyclopedia, let me know in the comments what future makeup topics you'd like me to cover in future encyclopedia episodes. Thank you guys so much for watching. I love you all, and I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.